The whole nobody escapes. There are prisons, and then there are places designed not to rehabilitate, but to break. Places where the most violent, uncontrollable inmates in an entire nation are sent when every other prison has failed. Places where silence is enforced, where human contact is restricted, where even other prisoners are considered a threat. In Canada, often viewed as calm, progressive, and humane, there exist facilities so severe, so isolating, and so feared that even hardened criminals whisper their names. Tonight, we take you inside Canada's most feared prisons. Not the ones tourists read about, not the ones politicians like to discuss, but the prisons built for inmates who cannot be controlled anywhere else. This is a story of the Quebec Special Handling Unit, an Edmonton Maximum Security institution. Once you enter these places, you do not come out the same. Most feared prisons in Canada. Canada's dark correctional secret. Canada is often ranked among the safest countries in the world. Its criminal justice system is praised internationally. Its prisons are described as humane, rehabilitative, progressive, but behind that reputation lies a truth rarely explored. Because when Canada encounters inmates who are too violent, too manipulative, too dangerous for even maximum security prisons, the system responds with containment, isolation, and absolute control. That response has a name: Special Handling Units. Facilities designed not for sentences, but for management. And among them, none is more feared than the one hidden in Quebec. The inmates no prison could handle. Archival footage, prison riots, emergency response teams, injured guards. Narrator: to understand why the Special Handling Unit exists, you must understand who ends up there. These are not first-time offenders, not impulsive criminals, not men who made one bad decision. These are inmates who assaulted correctional officers, organized prison gangs from behind bars, took hostages inside institutions, killed other inmates while already incarcerated, repeatedly escaped secure facilities, or were deemed too disruptive to manage anywhere else. Some were transferred multiple times across provinces. Some left trails of violence behind them. And eventually, every path led to the same destination: the Quebec Special Handling Unit. Quebec Special Handling Unit, Canada's prison of last resort. Located within the Archambault Institution complex in Saint-Anne-des-Plaines, the Quebec Special Handling Unit, known simply as the SHU, is not a prison in the traditional sense. It is a containment facility, an institution within an institution, built to house inmates who represent an extreme risk to others and to the system itself. Every movement is controlled. Every interaction is monitored. Every decision is calculated to prevent violence. Unlike regular maximum security prisons, inmates here are locked in their cells up to 23 hours a day, moved only under escort, restrained during most out-of-cell activities, isolated from the general prison population entirely. This is not punishment. This is management. Or at least, that's how it's officially described. Life inside the SHU. A typical day inside the Quebec SHU begins in silence. Inmates wake alone, eat alone, think alone. Cells are sparse. Concrete walls, a steel bed, a toilet, no distractions, no comfort. Human interaction, when it happens at all, is brief and controlled. Even recreation is solitary. One inmate, 1 hour, under constant surveillance. For some prisoners, weeks pass without meaningful conversation. For others, months. And for select few, years. The psychological cost. Isolation does something to the human mind. Studies show that prolonged solitary confinement can cause anxiety, hallucinations, depression, paranoia, cognitive decline, emotional breakdowns. Inside the SHU, these effects are not theoretical. They are routine. Former inmates have described talking to themselves for hours, losing track of time, hearing voices, feeling detached from reality, forgetting how to interact with other humans. And yet, the system continues to rely on the SHU because the alternative is chaos. When control fails, even in Canada's most secure unit, control is not guaranteed. There have been violent incidents. attacks on staff, self-harm, extreme resistance. Every response is tactical. Emergency response teams in full riot gear, chemical agents, use of force protocols. Because when something goes wrong inside the SHU, there is nowhere else to send the inmate, and that reality haunts everyone who works there. Transition from isolation to raw violence. But while Quebec's Special Handling Unit relies on isolation and psychological control, there's another prison in Canada feared for a very different reason. A place where violence is not hidden behind silence, but erupts openly. A prison where power is contested daily. This is Edmonton Maximum Security Institution, and its reputation is written in blood. In the next chapter, we go inside one of the most dangerous prisons in Western Canada, where gangs rule cell blocks, where guards walk a thin line between order and disaster, and where survival is never guaranteed. Edmonton Maximum Security, where order is negotiated. Edmonton Maximum Security Institution, often called Edmonton Max, does not rely on silence. It relies on containment through force, presence, and constant negotiation. Located in Alberta, this facility houses some of the most volatile offenders in Western Canada. Not all are lifers. Not all are serial killers. But many are men who thrive in chaos. Unlike the Quebec Special Handling Unit, Edmonton Max operates with population density. That density creates friction, and friction creates violence. A prison built for conflict, Edmonton Max was designed as a traditional maximum security prison. Multiple ranges, shared spaces, movement schedules, work programs. On paper, it resembles many other Max institutions across Canada. In reality, it functions more like a pressure cooker, because when hundreds of high-risk inmates are confined together, with histories of gang involvement, drug trafficking, and violence, every decision becomes a potential trigger. Correctional officers here do not simply enforce rules. They read body language. They track alliances. They sense tension before it explodes. Because once violence starts in Edmonton Max, it spreads fast. Gangs behind the walls. Inside Edmonton Max, gang affiliation is currency. Prison gangs do not merely exist here. They operate. They organize protection. They control contraband. They settle scores. And they do not disappear at the prison gates. Street gangs from across Western Canada, indigenous gangs, biker-connected groups, and organized crime affiliates all leave their fingerprints inside these walls, where the SHU isolates dangerous individuals. Edmonton Max contains dangerous networks, and those networks constantly test the limits of authority. A day on the edge. A typical day at Edmonton Max begins with tension already in the air. Counts are done with precision. Movements are staggered. Every escort is deliberate, yet unpredictability is constant. A verbal exchange can become a stabbing in seconds. A debt dispute can ignite an entire range. A lockdown can last hours. Correctional officers train extensively for these moments, but no training fully prepares you for real violence, especially when weapons are improvised from toothbrushes, metal scraps, or broken fixtures. When the system locks down, when Edmonton Max loses control, even briefly, the response is immediate. Full institutional lockdown. No movement. No programs. No visits. Emergency response teams deploy in riot gear. Chemical agents are authorized. Extraction protocols begin. Visual. Shielded officers moving down a range. These are not routine events. They are calculated interventions meant to prevent escalation, because history has shown what happens when prisons hesitate. Real incidents, real consequences. Over the years, Edmonton Max has been the site of officer assaults, coordinated inmate fights, gang-related stabbings, prolonged lockdowns following riots, inmate-on-inmate killings. Each incident leaves a mark on the institution, on the staff, on the inmates themselves. Pause. Quiet ambient noise. Some officers leave after a single traumatic event. Others stay for decades. They do not see themselves as guards. They see themselves as barriers between order and collapse. Two prisons, two philosophies. Narrator, the Quebec Special Handling Unit, and Edmonton Maximum Security represent two extremes. The SHU controls violence by removing interaction entirely. Edmonton Max controls violence by managing interaction carefully. One relies on silence, the other on constant vigilance. One isolates individuals, the other contains populations. Both succeed, both fail, and both leave lasting psychological scars. The human cost. Behind every policy debate, every media headline, every statistic, are human beings. Inmates shaped by trauma, addiction, and violence. Officers absorbing stress, fear, and moral conflict. Families on the outside waiting for phone calls that may never come. Canada's most feared prisons are not monsters. They are responses to people society does not know how to handle. Midpoint pause, what happens next? But the real question isn't how these prisons operate. It's what happens after. Can inmates from extreme isolation ever return to society? Can violence learned inside walls be unlearned? And what happens when control finally slips? In the next chapter, we explore release, reintegration, and the haunting legacy of Canada's harshest prisons. Release from the most controlled places, 1 hour and 31 minutes to 1 hour and 39 minutes. Sound design, a distant door buzz. A final steel lock disengages. Narrator, there's a moment, quiet, unceremonious, when even the most feared prisons must let go. Not because the danger is gone, not because the damage is healed, but because a sentence has ended. For inmates released from the Quebec Special Handling Unit or Edmonton Maximum Security, freedom does not arrive as relief. It arrives as disorientation. Men conditioned to silence, restraint, and constant threat suddenly face choices again. What to eat, where to stand, how close to walk to another human being. Visual, a man standing outside a prison gate, winter wind blowing. For some, the outside world feels louder than a riot. When isolation follows you out, former SHU inmates often describe a common experience after release. Crowds feel overwhelming. Conversations feel artificial. Eye contact feels dangerous. Years of isolation rewire the brain. Psychologists call it institutionalization, the loss of the ability to function without rigid structure. Some men isolate themselves voluntarily. Others explode emotionally when confronted with minor stress. And the system knows this, which is why parole officers quietly admit something unsettling. Many SHU inmates are more dangerous after release than before confinement, not because they are evil, but because they were never taught how to come back. Edmonton Max and the code that never leaves. For inmates released from Edmonton Max, the challenge is different. They leave with something intact. A code. Prison gang politics do not disappear at the gates. They migrate. Debts remain unpaid. Alliances continue. Enemies remember. Some former inmates are pressured immediately upon release to traffic drugs, enforce discipline, or retaliate for incidents that occurred years earlier. Edmonton Max does not just contain violence. It teaches survival strategies that follow inmates into the streets. The officers who carry it home. The story does not end with inmates. Correctional officers pay a price rarely discussed. Hypervigilance becomes habit. Crowds trigger stress. Silence feels unsafe. Many officers experience symptoms similar to combat veterans. Nightmares, emotional withdrawal, irritability, moral injury. Some leave the profession entirely. Others stay and adapt. They do not brag about where they work. They simply say, I work corrections, and change the subject. Public perception versus private reality. From the outside, debates about prisons are simple. Too harsh, too lenient, too expensive, too dangerous. But inside the system, the questions are far more complex. What do you do with someone who cannot coexist with others? What happens when rehabilitation fails repeatedly? Where does accountability end and containment begin? The Quebec SHU and Edmonton Max exist because there are no easy answers. They are not mistakes. They are last resorts. When control becomes a point. In both institutions, one principle dominates above all others. Control, control of movement, control of space, control of time, control of behavior, and slowly, subtly, control becomes a goal, not rehabilitation. Because when safety is at stake, ideals retreat. The question is not whether these prisons work. It's what they turn people into. Canada's unseen line. Canada prides itself on balance, justice and compassion, security and humanity. But hidden within that balance is a line most citizens never see. On one side, rehabilitation, hope, second chances. On the other, containment, isolation, and control. The Quebec Special Handling Unit and Edmonton Maximum Security sit exactly on that line, quietly, relentlessly, doing the work no one wants to think about. Final chapter. The doors never really open. For those who enter Canada's most feared prisons, the doors never fully open again. Some carry the silence of isolation. Others carry the violence of survival. And the rest of us live comfortably, protected by walls we pretend do not exist, because somewhere beyond the razor wire, someone is awake in a concrete cell, counting hours, waiting for a door that may never open the same way twice. The uncomfortable truth. If the story changed how you see Canada's prison system, share it. If it made you uncomfortable, that's the point. And if you want more documentaries that go where others won't, subscribe, because these stories don't end when the cameras stop.